Hi folks! In the last 2 years, tens of thousands of people have moved to Calgary thanks to its relatively low cost of living compared to major cities like Toronto and Vancouver, both of which became completely unaffordable in the last 5 years. Mind you, most newcomers aren't necessarily international students, but also Canadians escaping ridiculously high cost of living from Ontario and BC, looking to start fresh and finally afford something, somewhere. Today, it's pretty much impossible for young people to enter a housing market or to find an affordable rent anywhere else but Calgary and Edmonton. I mean, try surviving in a city where one-bedroom apartment costs you $2,700 plus, a whole month's salary after tax for some people, especially those who are just starting their careers. You know, mostly young people, students. Not everyone makes $100,000 straight out of college, which seems to be like an expectation today if you want to afford a very basic quality of life in Toronto or Vancouver. Anyways, all that mess brings us to Calgary, the most livable city in North America according to the Economist Intelligence Unit, and also the third largest city in Canada as of today. To be fair, Calgary has never seen such a population increase before, and this might not be the only year we're seeing such drastic growth as people keep on coming in even bigger waves in 2024. So we might be hitting new records quite soon. It hardly surprises me. The city has a lot of good things going for it still. So let's talk about upsides and all the downsides of living in Calgary after both the housing and job markets change significantly with all the influx of new people, to find out if it's still relatively affordable compared to all the other major Canadian cities. To just, kind of find an answer if it's still worth it to live in Calgary. All I ask you to like this video well in advance. You can always take it back if you don't like what I've got to say. No hard feelings there. Hit that subscribe button below to hear an unbiased take on Canadian finances and housing markets without any of realtors' crap and paid agenda that literally brainwashes and just filled Canadian YouTube in the last few years. And let's get going. The very first benefit that comes to mind, despite a rapid increase in housing prices, is still affordability. Don't laugh. Yes, it's certainly not as cheap as it was back in 2021, and you're not likely to find a one-bedroom apartment downtown for $1,100. These prices are long gone. Forget about it. The immigration boom and high interest rates combined led to massive rent increases all over the place. And according to latest reports, it now costs $1,800 to rent a one-bedroom apartment and over $2,100 for a two-bedroom apartment in Calgary, which is nuts. Even though it's a drastic increase for just 2 years, it's still about $1,000 cheaper compared to Toronto or Vancouver even now. And that's not the only reason people keep on moving to Calgary, of course. The quality of life here is also higher compared to any other major Canadian city, and I will explain why shortly. It's not only the housing. You probably want to stop me here and ask, wait, aren't the salaries supposed to be way higher in Toronto if rents are so much higher compared to Calgary? The short answer here is no, they're not, but we will come back to wages and median and average incomes in just a few minutes. Personally, after living 3 years in Toronto and just about the same in Calgary, the latter to me is a clear winner by a long shot. Not only it's a much cleaner city, it also gets over 330 sunny days a year on average, a huge benefit compared to grey and gloomy concrete jungles of Toronto, that's for sure. Calgary's nature is outstanding too. You can get great parks and hiking trails everywhere. Of course, we can't forget about the proximity to mountains, as Banff and Lake Louise are less than 2 hours away from the city center. These are very nice haves. Now, in case you're planning to own real estate in the future, the reality is you will likely still afford something if you budget and save accordingly, which is out of the question for most people in Toronto or Vancouver. No matter the savings habits or your personal finance knowledge or even your income, it is simply too expensive to even afford a studio. That might surprise you, but Calgary, you can still find plenty of options even in the range of $250,000 to $400,000. Starting with decent condos and going all the way up to fairly sized townhomes. In Toronto or Vancouver, that amount will get you this. Just take a look at that, do your own comparison. For even a studio, you would need over $500,000. Forget it. Personally, I purchased a condo here only because of its affordability and have been pretty satisfied with my decision so far. I pay around $1,000 a month for a decent place near 17th Avenue. It's a one bedroom, which is way lower than comparable rents in the area. Yes, the prices have gone up a lot in the last 2 years, but it is still possible to afford a nice place here in Calgary, as we're still far away from Ontario and BC's ridiculous home prices. Just don't stress, never rush with your decision, with your purchase. Don't trust what realtors say, and do your own research, and you will come out way ahead in the end. That I can promise you. The second most important aspect after housing is always the job market. You must know how easy it is to find a job and how well you're going to get paid in the new province. Now, you would assume that Toronto or Vancouver have the highest income because these are the biggest and obviously most expensive cities in Canada, but that's not the case at all. Among the largest Canadian cities, Calgary had the highest average income of $60,000, while Montreal had the highest median income of $41,000. Among all the provinces, Alberta had both the highest average and median income of $57,000 and $41,000 respectively, more than Ontario, BC, and Nova Scotia combined in all categories. Also, with more companies moving and opening up in Calgary, the job market here is doing great as well. According to the most recent stats, Calgary has had over 180,000 job openings last year, compared to 170,000 in Toronto. Now, don't forget that Calgary also has a smaller population, 1.3 million versus almost 2.8 in Toronto. So the difference in chances of finding a job here is massive. At almost 50% cheaper rents and smaller taxes, 5% in Alberta versus 13% in Ontario, and the possibility to own a home within the next few years, even if it's a small condo, compared to being, a forever renter, you will uncover the reason for this historically highest immigration to Calgary and Edmonton. I guess it's not so surprising after you compare all the facts, is it? Now, let's talk about the negative stuff. And yes, there are a few things to cover. You probably think I'm about to start complaining like everybody else about the weather, bitching and moaning. And yes, everywhere in Canada during the winter, it is cold. I would rather be in Florida or somewhere sunnier. However, it's not much colder than I recall from my time in Toronto, so I wouldn't necessarily call it a Calgary's downside. It's just Canada's general thing. The real big issue is this: you can't survive without a car. It's not very pedestrian friendly and too car dependent. Calgary has poorly designed, heavily car dependent infrastructure all over it. With the lack of solid urban planning anywhere past downtown comes not the most reliable public transport, which produces a deadly combination if you don't have a car. So, bad transport, terrible infrastructure, disaster. City has been implementing some smart ideas, for example, blocking the traffic on 17th Avenue on weekends, but this is not enough. Ideally, I would want to see 17th Avenue free from traffic, free from cars all the time. But even the small progress is still appreciated. You can argue that these are just North American issues in general, and you will be right. You literally cannot survive without a car in most places, especially in Calgary if you live outside of the city center or have to commute somewhere far for work. Then you probably will need a car because some parts of the city don't even have a sidewalk. You literally have to share the road with cars, hoping that you won't get run over. Major car dependency is equally horrible for both your health and personal finance. But that's the topic for another video I'm working on right now. So stay tuned, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.